It's my joy this morning to bring you a word of encouragement in the faith, to build up your faith as we walk out the Christian life. In Mark chapter 11, Jesus and the 12 disciples are walking to Jerusalem. And Jesus sees a fig tree, and he says, I'm hungry, and he walks over, but the fig tree has no figs. And the only thing Jesus curses in his entire ministry is this unproductive tree. He says, may no one ever eat of you again. And he just walks away and goes about his daily business. The next day, Jesus and all 12 disciples are walking back to Jerusalem. They pass the same tree, and Peter notices something in verse 21. And being reminded, Peter said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. It's like Peter was surprised that what Jesus said happened. And Jesus gives an amazing answer. He turns to Peter and the other 11, and he says this, have faith in God. Our country has been through a once-in-a-century pandemic. It looks like we're headed into an economic recession. The price of gas is out of control. The price of food is out of control. Rents and housing prices are the highest they've ever been. But God's message, Jesus' message today is the same as it was when he and the disciples passed that fig tree. Have faith in God. Well, what is faith? The writer of Hebrews defines it for us in Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And in verse 2 he says, it is by faith that the heroes of old developed a good testimony. Of the 12 who were with Jesus at that time, one of them was James. James would become the leader of the Christian church in Jerusalem. And he would write the letter James to Christian Jews in Jerusalem on how to live the Christian life. And he expands further on this idea of faith in James 2:17. Even so, faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. The New Living Translation says it this way. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Faith is fundamental to the Christian life. Faith is necessary. But here's the thing about faith. You, on the day you became born again, did not immediately have a mature, mountain-moving, raise the dead, heal the sick faith. Peter writes that when you first became a Christian, you were a baby Christian. Our faith develops and it grows. You need to be believing for better things 30 years after becoming a Christian than you did 30 minutes after becoming a Christian. So the question is, how does our faith mature? The world should be able to see that we have developed a mature faith by what we do. Our faith should motivate us and compel us to action. This is built further by the writer of Hebrews in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 4 through 40. We call it the Faith Hall of Fame. The writer of Hebrews builds an argument. By faith, Abel offered a better offering than Cain. By faith, Enoch walked with God, and then he was not, so that he did not die. By faith, Noah built an ark, though it had never rained. By faith, Abraham left his inheritance in the land of his forefathers to sojourn in a foreign land. By faith, Sarah, though she was long beyond the ages of childbearing, believed that she could still have babies. By faith, though his body was as good as dead, Abraham at 99 years old believed that he still had nations inside of him and was able to conceive a son. See, the pattern for 36 verses is by faith, kingdom people take actions that advance the kingdom of God in the earth realm. And we are filled with the same spirit that all of them were filled with, that we can do the same things by faith, take actions that bring the kingdom of heaven down into our earth, into our spheres, and advance the kingdom here on earth. So today's message I've titled, Coming to Rehoboth, the Fruitful Place. And we're going to look at how faith develops in the life of Isaac. So we're going to pick up Isaac's story in Genesis chapter 26. Now here's the background. Isaac is the son of Abraham. He's the son of the promise. He's born to Abraham when he's 99 years old. Isaac is now married. Abraham has since died. Isaac is married to Rebekah. Rebekah was barren for 20 years. Isaac prayed for her. She conceives twins, Jacob and Esau. The whole family is living in the southern tip of the promised land in a town called Beer-lahai-roi. And at this time, Isaac now hits the first recorded trial of his life. So picking up in Genesis 26, verse 1. Now, there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Now, immediately, I have a question. Isaac's the son of the promise. He had heard this promise his whole life. He's living in the promised land. A famine comes, and there's no record that Isaac even prayed or asked God what to do. Isaac packs up his whole family and moves 40 or 50 miles north to Gerar in the middle of a famine. And reading this, I kind of want to say, why? Well, here's why. As we're going to see, children learn by watching their parents. Abraham, 100 years earlier, had made covenant with the previous king Abimelech of Gerar in the Philistines. And I think Isaac said, we're starving here in Beer-lahai-roi, but in Gerar, they will honor the commitment they made to my daddy. And so the whole family moves to Gerar. So they set up shop in Gerar, and then we see another verse 2. This makes no sense. I mean none. And the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land which I shall tell you. Live for a time in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and I will give your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Look at verse 5. Because Abraham obeyed me and fulfilled his duty to me and kept my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Verse 6, so Isaac lived in Gerar. Why on earth does God come to Isaac in verse 2 and say, don't go to Egypt? He had just moved either walking through deserts or by camel 50 miles north. Egypt is 500 miles southeast. What a weird statement. Now, we have Jewish teaching on this for millennia. They're called the Targums. The Jonathan Targum explains that in rabbinical wisdom, verse 2 should be read, Isaac purposed in his heart, I will go to Egypt. And God intervenes and says, don't. Well, why would Isaac, when he's moved 50 miles north, now move the family 500 miles south? Here's what I think happened. Isaac found out that the famine that was in Beer-lahai-roi is also the famine going on in Gerar. And then he learns a human nature. People who are starving don't care about deals your dad used to make. And they looked at him and said, what, foreigner, you think we're going to take care of you? And so he finds out there's nothing going on in Gerar either, and now he's scared and he's desperate, and he says, I will go to Egypt. Egypt's very important in the Bible. Egypt always represents the world. It is the world system, always. It is an economic system. At that time, Egypt was the economic epicenter of the world. And Isaac's answer, after looking at all of this, is, I'm going to go to the world for my help. I'm not going to the God of Abraham. See, when we get scared, it becomes very tempting to turn to the world instead of following and acting in faith, to believe that Jehovah Yireh, Jehovah my provider, is still on the throne. There's no record that Isaac prayed about this idea, but God intervenes. And so then we see in verse 6 the baby steps of Isaac's faith. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. This is obedience. See, the development of faith is going to require obedience to what God says. We have an entire book on God's advice and God's directions on how to live the Christian life. Developing a mature faith is going to require obedience. So now Isaac lived in Gerar, and he understood. God told him, I took care of your daddy and I got everything you need. Because Abraham obeyed, Isaac, you've got to obey too. And so that's what we see in verse 6. The baby steps are obedience. Now here's the thing. Everybody wants the final product in life. Every Christian would love to be able to lay hands on the dead and raise them. Very few people are willing to walk through the process to get to the product. Everybody wants the final outcome. Nobody wants to walk through the process. There is a process to developing faith, and we undervalue and we ignore baby steps because we forget that baby steps still move us forward. The baby steps of developing a mature faith are obedience. So what happens when we get to Gerar? By faith, Isaac stays in Gerar, and immediately we see his faith didn't mature overnight. Now, I don't have time to read verses 7 through 11, but the story is nuts. This thing's crazy. Isaac has just decided to stay where everybody's starving in a land where he doesn't speak the language, he doesn't know anybody, and his first reaction is to look over at his wife Rebekah and say, baby, you are smoking hot. Look at all these Philistine women. They don't look like you. And all these Philistine men are going to notice. And they're going to kill me because of you. So Isaac apparently has had enough faith to believe God would keep him in this land where everybody's starving and provide for him. But his faith when he looks at the beauty of his wife is, God brought me here to kill me so that they can take my wife and take my sons as slaves. That makes no sense. It's because he doesn't have a mature faith. So they come up with this ridiculous plan of, let's just lie and tell him you're my sister. Well, why would you come up with a ridiculous lie like that? Because children do what they learn from their daddy. And Abraham did that exact same ridiculous story twice. He did it in Gerar 100 years earlier, and then he went to Egypt and did it there too. So Isaac repeats what he learned from his daddy. Saints of God, sinners are the ones who lie to get out of consequences. That's what the world does. Christians with a mature faith say, no, that the truth sets us free, and we will live with the consequences of the truth. What are we teaching our children? Are we teaching them the way of the world, which is lie to get out of bad consequences? If you don't think that's what happens, I spent 12 years teaching public high school. Students will lie about anything if they think it'll get them out of the consequences. What are we teaching our kids? Isaac learned that the best answer is to lie. Don't trust God. The truth is, St. Augustine said it, the truth is a lion. It doesn't need to be defended. Just let it out of its cage and it'll defend itself. That's what we need to be teaching. So we see Isaac doesn't have a mature faith yet. But then we come along to verse 12. Abraham at this point is living off Abraham's faith. Isaac is living off Abraham's faith. And then verse 12 happens. Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100 times as much, and the Lord blessed him. And the man became rich and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. For he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. Verse 12 is a monumental, pivotal moment in Isaac's life. Now Isaac sowed. Don't overlook this. It was a famine. Nobody sows seed. Isaac's a professional farmer. He knows this. No one sows seed in a famine. The ground is hard. There's no water. Seed won't germinate, and there are starving birds who are going to eat all of the seed. Also, everyone else there was a professional farmer. Nobody is sowing seed right now. They're waiting on the rains. So Isaac gets out there and sows. Well, why did Isaac sow? By faith. Isaac believed the word of the Lord that I will bless you and multiply you in this land. Now, see, here's the thing. Isaac could have stood in the town square and declared in his greatest preacher voice, the Lord said, I will bless you and multiply you. I am here to be blessed and multiplied by the Lord. I am the one who carries the Lord's blessing. Faith without works is dead being alone. The works to display the faith was putting the seed in the ground in the time of the famine. Isaac didn't have to sow it. They were starving. He could have eaten it. You could eat the seed and live. It's what all the Philistines were doing. You don't think there was ridicule when everybody looked at him tilling a dry, dusty ground with no rain? Look at this idiot. He's just throwing away. His family's going to starve. And probably there's some Philistine dude like, yeah, well, as soon as he starves, I'm moving on the wife. By faith, Isaac sowed. See, faith is active. Faith does things. And it's at this moment that Isaac went from drafting off of Abraham's faith to having his own faith walk. I pray that at some point in your life you will have a moment where your faith becomes real just to you. If you were raised in a Christian family, praise God. I don't want you spending your life drafting off your parents' faith. There needs to be a moment when you realize it's you and God together. He wants to be so much more than just your Savior. He wants to be Lord of your life. So Isaac sows. God blesses him big time. Very wealthy, great household. The Philistines get envious and scared. They ate all their seed. Isaac sowed and he reaps 100-fold. So automatically, immediately, Isaac becomes the richest man in town. And here's how the Philistines respond in verse 16. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are too powerful for us. So Isaac departed from there and camped in the Valley of Gerar and settled there. When the blessings of the Lord come, the world might hate you. And so Isaac and his family get put out. So what happens? Well, now he's scared again. So what does Isaac do when he gets scared? He goes back to daddy, verse 18. Then Isaac dug again the wells of water, which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the same names which his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of flowing water, other translations say a well of living water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with the herdsmen of Isaac, saying, the water is ours. So he named the well Esek, because they argued with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too. So he named it Sitnah. Then he moved away from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he named it Rehoboth. For he said, at last the Lord has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land. So what happens when Isaac gets kicked out? Number one, he goes back to daddy. I will redig daddy's wells. Now, when you read the Bible, you have to read what's there, but you also have to read what's not there. What is not there? Isaac redigs Abraham's wells, and then he immediately digs more wells in the same place. And the Philistines quarreled over the new wells. They did not quarrel over the old wells. And there is no record that Abraham's wells produced any water. There is record of the new wells. I would suggest to you what that tells us is Abraham's wells were dry. So he has just moved out of Gerar. He's been kicked out. He takes all the time and all the effort to dig these wells in the Middle East where it's hot and there's no water. There's 2 points I'd like to make to you about Abraham's wells. Number one, Abraham's answers won't solve Isaac's problems. There are too many times where we are stuck trying to use yesterday's solutions to solve today's problems. Church at Victory in 2022 and forward is not going to look like it looked like in 2019 going backward. We've had a pandemic, and the events have changed. We aren't going back to old wells. In your business, if you're running your business today the same way you did in 2010, you need to seriously consider what you're doing. Times have changed. I'm in education. We are never going back to what the educational model looked like before the pandemic. Those are old wells, and it's time to move on to dig new wells of living, fresh water. The second thing I would tell you is when walking in faith, you can be doing everything right, but you may still experience disappointments and negative outcomes. Don't get stuck at dry wells. The job promotion didn't come like you expected. COVID happened and the business you had just started went bankrupt. She left me. He left me. The negative experience happened. I am not denying the emotions. I'm not denying the pain. What I'm telling you is don't sacrifice Rehoboth at the altar of the pain of the current dry well. There is a fruitful place after divorce. There is a fruitful place after incarceration. There is a fruitful place after bankruptcy. There is a fruitful place after the loss of a child. Yes, the negative experience is real. I'm not denying it, and I have much empathy for it. But don't spend the rest of your life at the dry wells. Isaac doesn't get stuck. He digs more wells, and then we learn that the blessings of the Lord often attract opposition. He gets opposition from two places. He digs one well, and people oppose him. He names it Esek. The blessings of the Lord will attract envy from the world. And there will be people who will try to hold you back, try to sabotage you, try to stop you from moving forward in what God has for you. And then he digs another well, and he names it Sitnah. Now, the Hebrew root word for Sitnah is the same as the Hebrew root word for Satan. This can be interpreted as a spiritual attack. Rehoboth was 20 miles down the road. Satan knows the prophecy God gave Isaac. Now, since he can't stop Isaac, this is an attempt at delaying Isaac from getting on to his destiny. Brothers and sisters, the lesson for us is don't get stuck on your path to the fruitful place by fighting fights and battles that you don't need to fight. Satan's plan was to get Isaac bogged down in a war at Sitnah. See, in the ancient Near East, taking someone else's well is an act of war. Isaac dug the wells. If you have a big-time fairness doctrine inside you, you're angry right now. They were his wells. He did all the work, and then the Philistines came and just took them. And Isaac discerned, God has something else for me besides spending the rest of my life fighting with you. And Isaac packs up and leaves. Brothers and sisters, we are not going to spend our time arguing on Facebook with atheists who hate Jesus. We are called to be his witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the outermost parts. We're not called to be his defense attorneys on Facebook. Don't get stopped fighting battles you weren't called to fight. Isaac doesn't get stuck. He moves, he digs more wells, and we go on down to Rehoboth. Now, in Hebrew, the name of Rehoboth is Rehovat, the fruitful place. The fruitful place has four meanings. It's a place for expansion. It is a place to be fruitful. It's a place to engage in commerce, and it means a wide open space. So when Isaac gets there, Isaac looks at this space and makes a declaration in faith. And now we will be fruitful. It is easy to miss how important that statement is. To understand that, you need to know where Rehoboth is. Rehoboth is 20 miles south of the Valley of Gerar, and it is in the smack dab middle of the Negev desert. The Negev desert is a desert in every sense of the word. It is dry, there is no rain, there's no water, it is rocky, sandy dirt. And no one with any sense would look at that and say this is a fruitful land for a farmer. But Isaac is a professional farmer. So how in the world I'm trying to think of his wife, Rebecca, look at him and say, boy, you brought us here to this? And he's like, yes, woman of God, we will be fruitful. Now look how far Isaac has come by faith. The man who was leaving town without even asking God what to do, who was going to go to Egypt and let the world be his source and supply, can look at a dry, arid space and declare, God has brought us here to be fruitful. The Philistines didn't even they didn't even quarrel with him over the well at Rehoboth. Why? Because they didn't want the land. They looked at it and said, nothing can grow here. We don't want to be here. Brothers and sisters, may I suggest to you, what God has for you as your fruitful place may not look attractive to the world in its present state, because there is an aspect of Rehoboth that we have to recognize. Being fruitful requires a lot of labor. Now, I know in Christianity we all want to say it is favor, not labor. Brothers and sisters, that is not the pattern of the Bible. The pattern of the Bible is God's favor plus man's labor produces fruitfulness. So when you're coming to Rehoboth, when you're coming to your fruitful place, you best believe it takes a lot more labor to reap 1,000-fold harvest or 100-fold harvest than it does a 2-fold harvest. When you get to Rehoboth, you better be ready and you better prepare yourself that you're going to work a lot more than you are when you're over here in Gerar or you're in Bir Lahai or you're at Esek or you're at Sitna. When you get to Rehoboth, your eyes come open. I'm ready to say yes. If you're over here praying, God, enlarge my territory, increase me financially, then you better be ready to say yes to working more hours. We can have more amens for working more hours. You better be ready for working more hours, managing more people, and doing more projects. Faith without works is dead. Don't come tell me you're believing in God to move in your finances if you're saying no every time God gives you another opportunity to do more work. God won't be mocked. And lastly, don't ever confuse Rehoboth with Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man to rest. When you come to Rehoboth, it's made for man to labor. When you come to your fruitful place, we were put here to be productive. Isaac knew what kind of work would be necessary to be fruitful in a desert. When you get there, you get that promotion you've been praying for, you better start showing up work early and working a bit later. You're working for the Lord and not unto man. The university I'm at now, I say yes to every project that comes my way. Why? Because I'm in Rehoboth. And I will be fruitful. Saints of God, God has a plan for our region. God's not done with eastern Ohio and western Pennsylvania. He's just getting started. The world may look at our region and see a desert place. It sees a lot of empty steel mills in Youngstown and Sharon. It sees a lot of profound drug problems, sees unemployment, sees a lack of education. But what we need in our region is not more government assistance. What we need are Isaacs who have been through famine and have by faith taken actions that have built the kingdom. And they developed a mature faith over the course of a lifetime. And they can come to our region, look at all the facts, see it all, not deny any of it, and say, by faith, I see Rehoboth, and I've come here to be fruitful. Stand with me. I would like to invite our altar ministry to come forward. In just a minute, I'm going to bless the congregation, and then I will be out in the auditorium. I would love to say hello to you if you have time. But if you need prayer ministry, this is the most important moment of the day. We have trained, seasoned men and women of God who are ready, willing, and able to help you with whatever your need is. My question for you today is, where are you in your journey? Are you currently walking in a season of famine? Are you wandering aimlessly, looking for whoever or whatever has what you need? God alone can meet the needs of the human heart. Are you stuck at old dry wells? Would you like prayer for guidance? We're here. Are you currently at Essek or Sitna and you need wisdom to know if you are fighting battles you shouldn't be fighting? Yes, there are battles we have to fight, but there's a whole lot of battles that we should just move on. And we need to answer them like Nehemiah answered Sanballat. Why would I ever stop what I'm doing and talk to you? Are you in Rehovot, but you're not sure about the amount of labor? God has made you productive, and we will pray with you to build your productive capacity and your productive spirit. If you need prayer for any reason, our prayer ministry team is here for you. And after I bless the congregation, if you need prayer for any reason, please come forward. Don't wait, and we will be happy to minister with you. Every eye open, ready to receive. Lord, I thank you for a faithful people. I thank you for people who have the eyes to see that those who are with us are greater than those who are against us. Lord, I ask today that you will build faith in your kingdom. Lord, I ask that you use us to bring the kingdom of heaven here in our region. Lord, make us a shining example to the world that they will say, I want what they have. Lord, guide us all as we go forward this week, that what we do will honor you and build your kingdom. The Lord your God wins victory after victory and is always with you. He celebrates and sings because of you, and he will refresh your life with his love. Amen and amen.